and to shed further light on the current conference meetings that have been taking place in Paris, and specifically that regarding the situation in Palestine, in which the three presidents of Egypt, France and Jordan took part of. We are joined over the phone by Her Excellency Ambassador Moushira Khattab, former Minister of Family and Population and a prominent diplomat. Thank you very much for joining us, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, let's first start by taking your opinion and your stance towards the decision that President Sisi took to allocate $500 million in the reconstruction process of Gaza during its humanitarian crisis due to the Israeli airstrike. What does that symbolize Egypt and the role that Egypt is playing in the Middle East region and specifically in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Well, at a very hard time, like the time we're going through now, the Egyptian initiative declared by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to offer $500 million for reconstruction in Gaza, and before that, his initiative to open the crossings. And the National Academy for Training has offered 5 scholarships for our Palestinian brothers to have training at this. This reflects true solidarity with the Palestinian people, because what we're seeing right now is hypocrisy. If you follow what's happening in the world, you find some quarters are banging on our head with respect for human rights.
Exactly.
And we see utter violation of human rights, not only the Palestinian people, but the Palestinian children. The Israeli troops are killing Palestinian children, and nobody is lifting a finger. So far, 59 children have died. We have not heard from the Human Rights Council in Geneva. We haven't heard from the Security Council in New York. We haven't heard from the European Parliament. We haven't heard from nobody. Where is human rights from this? It's hypocrisy, it's double standard, and I tell Egyptians, don't be offended when these people raise certain slogans in your face. We as Egyptians have to do the right thing for us, because this is what we want, not because someone else is asking us to do what they think is good for us.
Your Excellency, as you've correctly mentioned, because that was exactly what I wanted to ask you about, especially as you have had long experience in the Ministry of Population and Family and Population in Egypt, and as you've correctly said, the children and the trauma and the dramatic psychological changes that will be resulting as they grow up due to the circumstances of life and the dire humanitarian crisis that they live in. And mind you, the Palestinian children in specific have forever lived in such crises time after time. Today, and as we are in a different era, as in Egypt, and we as decision makers and influencers in the region, what can be done, the role of Egypt to pressure and push for further concrete actions to be taken by those international communities that are the same communities who always call for human rights and respect to human rights and children. What can be done to be able to support these children who are in dire need of help?
Many things need to be done. Number one, we need to flag international human rights law, and we need to flag the responsibility of Israel, the occupying power, to respect international human rights law, and no exception. And we have, as an international community, to push to stop Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people. Gaza has been under siege for 14 years now. This is collective punishment for the people of Gaza, not for a government. It's collective punishment for the people of Gaza. It is time to end impunity for the crimes that take place in the occupied Arab territories. the Human Rights Council in Geneva, Security Council, the High Commission for Human Rights, the governments of the so-called democratic countries, they must demonstrate that human rights is human rights for everybody. We have to respect human rights for everybody. It's time for international accountability of Israel for violating international law at the two levels, the political and the military level. And it's high time for the United Nations to bear its responsibility to provide shelter and immediate assistance for civilians who have been affected by the Israeli attacks on Gaza in order to provide decent shelter for this. And it's high time to stop the settlements. It is utter violence to evict people, peaceful people, from their homes in order for the settlers to build their own. I mean, this is despicable.
Absolutely.
And we have to, as a global community, we have to know that the time for colonial policies is over. And we have to stop double standards when it comes to Israel. We have to insist on abiding by international law, both international humanitarian law and United Nations conventions on human rights.
Absolutely. Your Excellency, Ambassador Moushira Khattab, former Minister of Family and Population and also prominent diplomat, thank you very much for joining us here on Cairo Local Time. And as part of a busy agenda and much of discussions that have been taking place during the past couple of days in Paris during President Sisi's official visit to France, President Sisi and the French President Emmanuel Macron had also discussed the Ethiopia's dam file. That happened at a meeting that took place at the Élysée Palace in Paris on Monday, where they had discussed also the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and means of support and the role that France can play in mediating and holding ceasefire as well. Let's take a look at this report.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi met with French President Emmanuel Macron